Stuart is a doctor. He's an MD. He's also the Dean of the University of Arizona College of Medicine here in Phoenix and professor in the Department of Basic Medical Science. As a anatomic pathologist with a strong diagnostic focus, Flynn has been doing translational research, wedding bench research to patient care. His specific areas of study have included gene expression and autoactivation and breast cancer, cell cycle kinetics and a host of cancers, multi-drug resistance and modulation in cancers, the immunopathology of heart transplantation, and the pathobiology of metastatic melanoma. As a hematopathologist, he has studied the immunophenotype and molecular analysis of all subtypes of lymphomas and leukemia, and immunodeficiencies, including AIDS. Recent work has also included epidemiologic studies of lymphoma, breast cancer, and colon cancer, assessing the role of environment, diet, and more. Dr. Flynn also finds time to work with school children in the Isaac District, coach soccer, and coach Arizona Science Center on curriculum projects. He is a graduate of the University of Michigan Medical School and did postdoctoral work at Stanford. He was formerly a professor of pathology and surgery at Yale University. Dr. Stuart Flynn.
Well, thanks, Steve. You did a great job. So I'm going to dovetail a little bit with what Ira talked about. But here, first of all, I'd be remiss if I didn't wish all the moms in the audience Happy Mother's Day a few hours from now. And I want to thank the Arizona Science Center also for the opportunity to do this. So thank you. So the charge that we were given was our talk should be personal. So I've thrown some of that in here. It should be fast. I've got cards. That'll keep me fast. And then it should be snappy. And I think Ira took all the snappy out of my talk. So here's, I wanted to hark back. I will just tell you, I have one of the most marvelous jobs there is. And one part of it I love so much is being able to train the next generation of physicians. I've had the luxury of doing that my entire career. And now I get to lead a school that does that. And I have at least 2 of my students in the audience, so they're going to think I'm saying that on their behalf. But it is absolutely true. So the personal part of this, I wanted to look in the rearview mirror and ask myself, when I started where these young people are, what did we not anticipate was going to happen in medicine? And then you'll see where we are in 2014. So I'll start with one, and that is the cervical pap smear. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that, other than when I was early in my training, I had a world-renowned cytopathologist try to train me how to look at pap smears. And there was a phenomenal technician that would screen the pap smears. And I would sit at the microscope with these 2. And this phenomenal technician would say, these cells look to me like they're infected with something. And my mentor would say, no, no. And I admired him. So when he said no, the answer was no. She'd come back the next day and she would say it again. And she was right. What she was seeing, which we did not know, were the changes associated with a viral infection of these cells, human papillomavirus, or HPV. That was at the beginning of my career. Now moved to today, and now we believe all cancers of the uterine cervix are caused by this virus that my mentor did not believe existed not that long ago. There are about 80 million people in this country infected with this virus. Of course, it doesn't cause cancer in all of them, just to take that away from you. But the good news is we now have a vaccine. So hopefully these numbers will go down. So that was one of several that we absolutely did not see coming. I did not see coming in my career. The second one is, again, very early in my career, we would give blood products to patients and they would get hepatitis. And we knew it wasn't hepatitis A because we could detect that. We knew it wasn't hepatitis B because we could detect that. So being very creative, what do you think we called this hepatitis? We called it non-A, non-B hepatitis, but we did not know what it was. But we were pretty convinced it was infectious. And now, again, I heard somebody yell out what it is. It is hepatitis C. So what was about 1 in 200 units of blood back then now becomes 1 in 10 million units of blood that might be infected with hepatitis C. The problem is, it's the baby boomer generation. This virus was discovered in 1989. Blood products were screened in 1992. So prior to 1992, the baby boomers, they were the ones who were exposed to this. And so this virus now is the leading cause of why we have to do liver transplants, just as a case in point. So again, non-A, non-B confused us. We know what it is now, and we know how bad it is, and what don't we have for hepatitis C? We don't have a vaccine. And the last one is a story where the two investigators won the Nobel Prize for this, but I just wanted to share how one of them decided to prove the theory. So when I was young, ulcers were due to either spicy foods or stress. So I had a 6th grade classmate when I was in 6th grade who had an ulcer, and he was eating really bland foods, and I couldn't figure out what his stress was. But that had to be what it was. Then I'm in medical school and I'm a resident, and I don't get ulcers, and I really felt like I was under a lot of stress, but I obviously wasn't under enough to get ulcers. Well, right around that period in time, the two investigators from Australia discovered this organism that they started to find in patients who had gastric ulcers. And the long and the short of it, the only reason I'm sharing this with you now is I would ask you, if you were one of those investigators, how would you prove your theory? What Barry Marshall did is he grew a big culture of this bacteria and he drank it. He proved his theory. He got wicked sick, gastritis, and subsequently won the Nobel Prize for discovering this bug. Not a bad price to pay. So that's how, if I had been looking into the future, I wouldn't have known that. So let me now just very quickly, because I'm going to get carded here very shortly, I would just ask you, if 1/3 of patients don't fill their prescription when they're given it, and another 1/3 who do take their medications incorrectly, what would you do to try to alleviate that? If we all know diabetic patients, what would you do for the diabetic patients to change the course of their disease? I have designer fashions here. If you could easily, rather than making a patient go to a doctor's office, if you could easily monitor your patient, what would you want to monitor and how would you do it? And the last one is, which I understand was presented before, how would you try to increase the organ transplant repair, the organ repair, organ transplant market? Well, I've given you 4 things that I'm suggesting you're looking into the future, but the reality is all 4 of these are here right now. So let me just very quickly tell you what they're all about. So the drug issue, compliance with medications, just a huge issue in society. Very costly, lots of morbidities, very hard to control. You can now go to Walgreens or CVS and buy what is called a blue cap prescription bottle that has a little chip in the cap. It's programmed to, it's programmed to know when you should take your meds. It's programmed how many pills are in the bottle. And when you're running out, it'll call your pharmacist. But critically, when you're supposed to take your meds, it'll send a signal to blue lights wherever you want them. And it'll also, especially for the elderly patients, it'll send a signal to your son or daughter who might be in Chicago. And so the end of the story on this is, when this was looked at in the elderly who really struggle because they take 26 pills a day. When they were given this container and functioned in this environment, their compliance went from out here to right here. So this is today. So when you buy that little 7-day box to put your different pills in, you have an option, and it's a pretty sweet option. The diabetes issue, very quickly. There are a whole bunch of things we could propose doing for diabetics. Growing new pancreases, how we deliver the insulin, which actually does exist. But the one thing that we still have not gotten away from is having to prick your finger so you can do a blood sugar level. So I have a little soccer player, 11 years old, just diagnosed 2 months ago with type 1 diabetes. And that little guy in the middle of practice has to go over, prick his finger, take his serum blood sugar level. So what exists now, and I don't pretend that it's going to be the end of this story, is a contact lens that will measure the glucose, the sugar, in tears. And it's a proxy for what's going on in the blood. And it changes color based on where your blood sugar level is. So rather than a patient having to prick him or herself with expensive equipment, with the pain and the inconvenience, either for my little soccer player, I could just look in his eyes and see what color his contact lenses were, or he could look in the mirror. I think for time's sake, I'll skip the designer fashion. And the 3D organs you've already heard about, but we have in this country 18 people a day die on a transplant organ list. Now this is not going to be up and running in the next 2 years, 5 years. I think it may be quicker than people think, however. But here's how this works. So you can take a piece of tissue from a patient, stem cells from a patient, put them into a culture medium, grow them up a little bit, and then in essence put them into a copying machine, and it will start duplicating them and make a 3D organ. So now, right now, we can make little part of a dime size piece of a liver. So if you think on the good news, we can now do drug studies, toxicity studies on true human tissue as opposed to animals. That'll be a huge advancement. We can make pieces of tissue to patch an organ that is broken. And when we can grow the entire organ, one could transplant it. So that's where the 3D organ story is going. So I would ask you, for the sake of time now, but this is rhetorical, if you could actually now look farther into the future. What is it that you would like? And it's more likely than not going to be something personal. It's going to be something in your family. It might have something to do with multiple sclerosis. It might have something to do with lupus. But I would hope for my 2 students sitting in this audience right now, maybe in their career, when they have their rearview mirror and they get to look back, maybe we will have taken cancer and turned it into a chronic disease. Not to shoot for the moon and hope we cure it, turn it into a chronic disease, which is identical. And I avoided talking about it because we spent so much time talking about it. It's identical to what has happened with AIDS, which was universally fatal when it first reared its head back in the early 80s. And now it is a chronic disease. So something to hope for, something to wish for. And lastly, and that's why what Ira was saying was definitely resonates, we are sitting in a city and a valley that has an unbelievable opportunity. We have a university, we have very good universities, and I have one that's 10 miles from me sitting in Tempe. We have healthcare systems that are just there ready to rock and roll. 80% of all healthcare discoveries, what I just talked about here, occur within 30 miles of an academic medical center. And so Phoenix deserves it, it needs it, it is absolutely ripe for it. You're about to hear, I have no doubt, some great scientists talk about where that should fold into this, and that should be ours, and it should be this state's. So I'm hoping in the future we represent some of these visionary outcomes in a very positive way. So thank you.